Having human conversations.
Hello, welcome everybody back to this episode of Human Conversations. This is Melanie.
This is Chelze.
And today we have a guest. Our guest today is Brandon McQueen, and I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit.
Hello, name is Brandon McQueen. If you're interested in the things that you hear in the following podcast, you can find me at YouTube/the Oreo Therapist.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you for sharing. And you are an associate marriage and family therapist, correct?
Yes, soon to be licensed in about a month.
Awesome. So today we're going to focus on talking about mental health considerations and issues experienced by men of color. And we are going to kind of focus on this conversation in a kind of a heteronormative, cisgender identified men perspective. So I just want to make that clear so everybody kind of knows, along the discussion where we're coming from on that.
Yes, and just to give a bit of context, we know Brandon from our doctoral program. He's also on his way to finishing up his program. Right, Brandon?
Yep, only a couple months left.
Yeah, there you go. So can you tell us just like a bit before we start why you decided to name your YouTube channel Oreo Therapy?
Well, I'm a black and white individual, and some of the things that I grew up with, like people would call me a zebra or Oreo or things like that. And for me, it's taking back a little bit of that pain and using, because pain is love for me. Like that's how I see it. And so putting a little bit of that love back into the world and back into people's lives. So that's why I chose to take something that affected me, and now I want to affect everybody else with it.
And we all know we need a little love today and these days.
Definitely.
Yes, so we really appreciate you taking the space and time to be on with us today because of everything else going on in the world. It means a lot to us.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So let's talk about men and mental health. There's a lot of stigma around men accessing mental health resources. I just wanted to share some statistics I found, and this was from the association called the Depression Project. They did some surveys, and they found out that 75% of all suicides are by males. That's a large percentage. And I'm curious about, where do we feel like this is kind of heading, and kind of from your perspective, Brandon, and like what are your reaction to that kind of statistics?
It doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of things that are out there that are so not understood at this point that it makes sense. Like that's the reaction that comes to mind. Like one thing I'm doing right now as I'm writing my dissertation is I'm looking at the emotional health of men. And one thing that became very interesting is we may not even know what depression actually is because of the rate at which men go to therapy and how men express emotions, which is usually through anger. It's quite possible that we're misrepresenting what depression is at a whole. Basically to say men don't know how to express their emotions safely, and so they're just throwing things out there. Our inventory on depression is, for the most part, based off of female emotions.
That's intense. I really, what you just said, the part where it's not safe, that part that really stands out to me.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about is extremely important. Because men are not socialized the same way that women are socialized with regards to emotional identification and expression and communication, right?
Correct.
So another statistic that they reported was that the Depression Project reported was that 40% of men won't talk to anyone about their struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So when you think about men who you have worked with in treatment, do you hear stories of how it was more of a struggle to access resources?
Yes, for a variety of different reasons, but I'll try to pigeonhole it a little bit in saying I work with a lot of Black males and Black females and Black families, however you want to put it, African American. And the struggle that they find is there's not a lot of Black therapists, and the Black therapists that are out there, they're predominantly female. A lot of men don't want to talk to another female about their problems because they feel like another female wouldn't understand. So accessing mental health resources for men is extremely difficult at this point.
Wow. And it makes me think about how even from the research and the readings I've recently done, how ancestral lines and lineages pass down this idea where Black families and Black culture, they don't have their fathers, they don't have men because of slavery, because of murders and all of that stuff, right? So there's like there's literally actually a hole. There's a whole person missing in the family system.
It's one of the first conversations I have with any Black individual that I see in therapy, and maybe this will open up a couple hearts. When Abraham Lincoln when Abraham Lincoln, we'll call it, freed the slaves. Remember, the slaves weren't immediately freed. Like in Texas, they kept the slaves around for about 2 years. And then I can't remember who, the certain general, came down 2 years later and said, you guys are free. And that's how like the freedom of slaves happened. Okay, think about that for half a second. People were down there raised to be slaves. That's all they knew. Slavery was it. And somebody just said, you're free. That's such a nuanced idea, and an idea that's so foreign. It's like, okay, so now what? What is freedom? So these slaves had children. All they knew how to do was be slaves. And you have to think about it from their perspective. They got yelled at, whipped, hit, kicked, raped, all different types of things. You think they didn't do that to their children? Black people, in my opinion, are doing the best that they can with what they got. You know, they did not have good parents, good great-grandparents, good anything. They had slaves as parents. There's a lot of empathy and a lot of just emotion that comes with that. And I think a lot of people try to dodge out of that because it's too painful to look at.
Yeah.
I think that's so important for sharing. Thank you. I think that, when we think about the generational impact and continuous, right, of not only the Black community, but there's definitely, Native American, other cultures that have experienced very similar experiences of being just ripped apart and torn down, right?
Mm-hmm. 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 And that's happened for generations. That's not like that happened, one time. That's been going on. That's been happening today. You see people getting assaulted in the street and quite a few other things. That is still happening today.
Yeah, and not even just so, like, we're speaking on a global level, but when we break it down to even in, let's say, in a classroom where you have students, all of those aggressions that happen in the room, all the subtleties, all the nonverbals, and how that trickles into our relationships, how we survive in our context of our systems, right? Because at that point it is surviving, right? We're not even in a place yet to be talking about being comfortable, to create, you know what I mean? It's like this idea of safety is now such a different experience for the Black community.
And just to expand it out there for men in general, at this point where we live, or excuse me, the time that we're living in, for the most part, men are only able to express anger, and you're allowed to cry once when your mom dies. That's really about it. And you might be able to get away with tears of joy when you have your first daughter, but that's about it.
It's very limiting.
Oh,
go ahead. Sorry, Chelze.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Well, I'm kind of thinking like, we want to support our men, right? They're half the population. And I think something, I think actually, Chelsea, you may have told me about this, but thinking about like who are the role models for men in our time that are, examples of what a healthy relationship, first of all, with just women are, but also just healthy relationships with other males, etc. Like those kinds of traits that what makes a man, kind of thing, right? And where are people getting those messages from?
It's a tough question all the way around. It really is. It's a tough question all the way around, because it's like, where are those healthy relationships coming from? Well, to be quite honest with you, there's so many men that are unhealthy. It's very difficult as a mentally healthy male to reach out and find other healthy males. That's a very difficult process. And then on top of that, if there are so many males that are mentally unfit or mentally unhealthy, well, they're really just like attracting that into their lives. They're spreading that to other people. The negative at this point is outweighing the positive. It's a really difficult question, and there's so many like factors to this. At least in my research, divorce seems to be one of the worst things to happen to young men in our lifetime. It seems to be. Single motherhood seems to be something that's just horrendous at this point. Just as far as the impact on on young men. And there's quite a few other things like to look at, not to just single that out. You have to think about it from a young man's perspective. Like when you go into kindergarten, most of the time the teachers are female. If you're with your mother and you go out to the checkout stand, usually the clerk is female. Everywhere the mom goes, she's usually going to go where other females congregate. So not having a father or not having a male role model in your life for a young man is devastating. Right there at the very young age, you don't learn how to reach out to men.
Wow. Oh, that's powerful. And hearing that perspective too, because I don't get to hear it that often, or even at all, to be honest. Especially because, like you're saying, the socialization of how you share as a man, if you identify as a man, how that can be so limiting.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really eye-opening when you share these things, because I think so much of the narrative now has really focused on exploring gender and exploring, not just exploring, but this concept that like gender is on a spectrum, and how we can show up just as we feel, who we are,
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of gotten away from this, the topics of other genders, right? Because we've for so long been talking about it. So I think it's interesting to see how much our history and how much the culture and our systems really impact the way that we create safety and what issues are coming up because of those things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The truth of the matter is, like, I'm not a woman, so I need a little help in this conversation. It's like, it may be safe for women. Like, it may be safe to be a woman and to show emotions, but to be a man and show emotions, absolutely not. At this point in time, any type of emotion that a man shows, it's pretty much thought to be anger. That's it.
Yeah, so I don't want to change the focus to women, because that's probably another conversation.
Sure.
I don't think, no, but I will answer your question. I don't think it's safe for some women to express emotion, but I think it's like very culture to culture component, and then also women in higher positions of power have limitations around that as well. But I think it's important to stick with how to support our men. So I'm kind of curious, like, if men are only allowed to show anger, I'm like, what are some signs for us to look out for, that to know that maybe some of these men in our lives might be suffering or going through some pain and stuff, and how will we know that if they're not verbally communicating that to us?
So it all bridges back. And I'm going to take, because essentially you need the female component to have this conversation, like, completely So like, I want to take a little bit of your answer. So if it's not emotionally safe for women to show emotions as well, like the problem in that is because men can't show emotions, women can't show emotions either. So it's a duplicitous effect at that point. If men can take the forefront and be able to be vulnerable and be able to open them up, women then have permission to do the same thing. And I don't mean it in the sense of like men are taking charge or women can't do it by themselves. I'm saying if women open themselves up and men are still closed, the only outcome that can happen is women get hurt. So there's an equal effect that needs to happen. Someone needs to put the foot forward, and if that has to be someone, men might as well start and lead by example. It at least opens it up. That's just my thoughts on it. Did you want to stop there, or did you want me to answer the question that you had thrown out as
Well,
well?
I think that's a good point. But I would like to have the question answered about like what are some signs like to look out for? Because I think that's important. Some of us maybe not aware of these things.
In all honesty, it's hard to spot if you're not aware, because it's like most if you ever look at kids who have ADHD, it's unacceptable for young men to have ADHD because their expressions are outwards and they affect everyone around them. But it's okay for young women to have ADHD because their effects are inward and they hurt themselves. And so why I'm using that example is if you have a young man that's acting out and you can like see it, more than likely there's an emotional turmoil that's happening. There's something in there that needs to be explored. I would say that's probably one of the biggest signs. If you have someone that's just closed off from emotion, that's usually one. If you have someone that's just the lines aren't matching up, like the person is saying something but their behaviors are doing something else, I'll bet my career that it's male depression in some way, shape, or form.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So when we break this down into our relationships, let's say our romantic relationships, we often in therapy, as we all know, the three of us, we see this pursuer-distancer dynamic, and then we can see a combination of different versions of this. But there is that underlying, avoidant, anxious style, right? And typically what we see when we're talking about cisgender heteronormative folks, we're seeing women identified anxious attachment, cisgender men avoidant attachment. So I'm wondering, in the context of what you're saying right now, Brandon, in terms of male depression, how would a partner, a woman in the relationship, be able to identify some of the small things in which their boyfriend or their husband or fiance is going through an experience like this? Like what would be like a phrase or maybe like a behavior that we might see with someone maybe around our age or in adulthood?
I got one for you.
Okay.
It popped in. So there's a couple things that I learned in therapy, and there's a couple things I've just learned from just wisdom. And this is just pure wisdom.
Ooh, pass it down.
There are only three people in this world that tell the truth, and that's angry people, drunk people, and children. If you're in a relationship and your partner just has anger in there, majority of the time when they say what they're saying in anger, that's the truth. That's literally the truth. And so if you look at that and you listen to what's being said in anger or what's being said during the drunkenness, you're probably hearing the truth at that point. And from there, that's probably where a decision needs to be made.
So it almost sounds like you're saying creating more space. Well, from my point of view, it would seem like to soften the blow, if you will. to create more space before these things build up and lash out, basically?
Yes and no. Yes, no. It's like, yes, you can create as much space as humanly possible, but in the same token, if your partner isn't creating that same space, well, you're just putting space in between you guys now. That's what it turns into.
Oh my
Um,
gosh, that's good. Yeah.
so there's a certain level of just accountability that I don't see in a lot of relationships that needs to be had.
Yeah.
And I think this is a point that needs to be said too. If your relationship is, for lack of a better word, bad, or it's on the rocks or whatever it is, it's your fault. Take responsibility for it. Do what you need to do. If you've done everything that you can, like every last thing, then do what you need to do. But taking accountability for your relationship is the first way to fixing it.
Accountability, and one that's been coming up for me is consistency. I think we forget the power in consistency. It's one thing to show up, but it's another thing to keep showing up, right?
Correct.
So, Melanie, did you have any questions left?
Yeah. Well, mostly going off of this. So, once we know what's going on, maybe have some idea of what's going on, and maybe thinking that our partner may be experiencing depression, maybe they get to the point where they are feeling safe enough to express it to us. What are some ways that we can, like some practical, maybe ways that we can support our men?
Show up. Yeah, I like that.
Man, what are some practical ways that we can show up? I'm indifferent about this question because I have many answers for many different types of people.
Yeah.
Like for some people, like I've worked with a lot of abusive relationships, and to be quite honest with you, the answer there, in my opinion, is to leave straight up, because what it turns into is either the person who is being abusive, and that could be male or female, wants that person back, the person who left, and they'll do anything possible to make it work, and they'll fix the problem right there, or they won't, meaning the relationship wasn't going to last anyway. If you're in a committed relationship and there's no abuse and stuff like that, start with couples therapy. And I mean a good couples therapist, one that's not going to be, that's going to lose impartiality, one that's going to sit there and listen to both sides and let you guys figure it out. I'm working with a family of 6 right now. And one thing that I'm realizing is they just need the space to talk. Like as they are at home, they talk in very short sentences, like 5 to 7 seconds, but them just sitting down and talking for an hour and a half and getting the full idea out is healing them. Just giving them the space to talk. That could be another route to go.
Yeah, I would even say for me in the relationship that I'm currently in, I know that my partner values safety in itself. Just that's like a very basic thing that we have been putting words to. And a lot of times it does look like, and my personality is, this is why I do yoga all the time and meditate, is because I tend to be very fast paced. And so I've had to learn to create space by slowing down, by pausing, by literally not saying anything, because I could fill so much space up with words. And I truly, truly believe and agree with what you're saying in terms of just getting it out. Like there's so much power in just sharing it and sharing all of it.
And like the main point is like sharing it with a person who the person can feel safe with and who's going to be patient. And you were talking about like a therapist being neutral, right? Like, so it's kind of safe ground for them to feel like they can open up in.
And being a male therapist, I find that to be a bigger problem too. If there's any males out there listening, we need you as therapists. Like 80% of the psychology field is dominated by women right now. So finding just a male therapist to connect to husbands and brothers and uncles and fathers is very difficult for a lot of people. The the most common phrase or the most common experience that I get is, yes, we've tried marriage counseling, or yes, we've tried couples therapy, and I felt that the therapist was on her side and would only look at her position and this and that. So there's definitely a balance that needs to happen. Where I'm at personally is I'm starting to see the downfalls of just one therapist in the room. I think you may need to have two therapists in the room of mirroring genders, possibly, to get the full story out.
Yeah, wouldn't that be the dream?
Yeah, let me tell you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, I know it's a little bit like going back to some things we talked about, but prior to when we started, you had mentioned, even in specifically within the Black community, how much there's a struggle in sharing, like even between you and your friendships, sharing maybe things you're experiencing. We were talking about more of like coming out in terms of sexuality and everything like that. I was wondering if you could put words to those relationships too, in terms of sharing.
Damn, it's a broad question. It's a big question. You have to look at the male role models in the Black community. And so within that, now you're talking about professional athletes who may not be the best at expressing emotion. You're talking about rappers who also may not be the best at expressing their emotions. And
but you're not talking about Nipsey, because he does.
Yeah, I was gonna say like Tupac, Biggie Small. There's some people.
Well, the legends, of course. That's why they're legends, right?
I said they may not be the best, and you guys go after the best. Yes, there are definitely some. Like LeBron James is another example where I think he's actually pretty decent at expressing his emotions and expressing what he wants. But remember, not everybody looks at that trifecta all the time. There's more examples of not them than just them.
Right.
Yeah.
I just had to throw that in there.
No, I got you. No, it's just funny. I was listening to Nipsey earlier today, and I was like, she would.
Oh man.
So in the Black community, I've heard a couple people talk about it, but it's just not cool to express emotions. It's not. It's cool to be negative, and that mindset is going to do so many different things in so many different ways that nobody's even looking at it.
Brandon, what I've noticed, if I may, from my woman lens, I've noticed that so when you're having this experience of camaraderie with your friends, and in particular with your guy friends, I noticed that there's a lot of safety when you can have that back and forth. It's like their way of connecting, but it's also a sense of status, right? Like in your social circles, you have your way of surviving through the language and that certain way of being. So it's almost like if you fight against that, you have to be willing to be alone and to be completely taken out of that group.
100%. 100%. And so now it turns into a debate about, is it better to be alone and be positive and have things work out, or is it better to be a part of the group and have people there and be stuck in the negativity? And I think
not everyone associates being alone with being positive, right?
Correct. No, correct. 100%. I think that taps into like a lot of people's different fears of not wanting to be alone, you know?
Yeah.
So, and I think that's an internal struggle and an answer you have to come to yourself. Would you rather be alone and positive or with people and toxic?
Oh wow, you're laying it down. That's really good.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of making me think like,
It always lays down, but I get it.
So how
ahead,
does one like? So where's the one person that's going to be in that group that's going to shift it for them? Like, where's where do those people come in? Like, how do we get more people to do that, to shift it? and I mean, I hear you saying like definitely for mental health for sure in our field, we definitely need more men and more men of color for sure.
Exactly.
So I'm just curious. I don't know if you have any more just ideas about it. I mean, we can't solve this problem now.
It's a genuine question, a genuine conundrum, because one, you have to be able to infiltrate the group. Like if you're positive on that level, you have to be able to infiltrate the group, which if the group in and of itself doesn't accept you, it's not possible. And so, and it leads back to that conversation of accountability at that point. It's like you have to want to. If you don't want to, I mean, I think all three of us know this as therapists. If your client doesn't want to get better, they're not going to get better. That's just it. You know, doesn't that like apply to the addiction field too? Like you have to want to get better.
Yeah.
So that's really where that comes in. I think the problem is the message isn't getting out there, and I'm doing the best that I can with what I got, but the message needs to be broadened on a global level, on a huge level at this point. The worst thing that can happen is we lose our men. And then who knows where it goes from there.
Yeah, and I do really think, because I mean, I'm a big advocate for this, but just it really comes down to being authentic. The more authentic you are with yourself, then the deeper you can kind of go in your systems. So, all right, well,
thank you for sharing all of your knowledge with us, Brandon. We really appreciate it.
I know we could go on and on because I know that's how we do, but I do want to reiterate, like, I'm really appreciative of this perspective. I know it's not something we've kind of, as a society, as a culture, especially in some of my circles, we've gotten away from talking about these things. So it's nice to create some space today to sort of put words to honestly a huge thing that's starting to kind of rise up now, especially with everything going on in the world. So I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your perspective.
No problem.
All right, well, you have just listened to another episode of Human Conversations with our lovely guest, Brandon McQueen. I am Chelze, and this is my co-host,
Melanie.
And hopefully we'll see you back for another episode. So stay tuned. Thank you so much.